Session 3 of the Python tutorial. Let's get straight into the video. So we're going to talk about using an array. And to be honest, in Python, an array and a list are basically the same thing. You can have NumPy arrays, which you can do a bit more with, but we're just going to talk about normal arrays. In other languages like Java, you might create an array and it might exist in a different way or be created in a different way than you would in Python, but it's basically the same thing. List, array, same thing. So if we just look at this code, we've just got a list that we've instantiated as a variable called myList, and there's just a few bits here like I showed you in the last tutorial that you can index on the list, and you can modify the list, and you can add elements to the end of the list with an append function, and there's also other functions you can do on that list like a pop, and of course you can then print this list to see what's happened. So let's just look at this. So as you can see on the screen, we've got the first element, which is 1, and the fifth element, which is 5, and you can notice the index is 0, and then to get the last element I've done -1, so that's line 5 and line 6, and then I've updated the list and then provided what it looks like after appending it, and then removed an element and provided what it looks like when you've removed it. So we're going to talk about two other types of flow control. So there's the if-else, which I showed in the last tutorial. So now we're going to talk about a for loop, and then we're going to talk about a while loop in the next section. So a for loop is just when you loop through, let's say, a list or something called an iterable, so something you can iterate through and go through each element in that list or whatever you're trying to loop through. And then we've got a numbers list here, which is just the numbers 1 to 5, and just showing you how a for loop works. So you just say for number in numbers, I want you to print number. So it should just print each element, and that's it. And there's different things you could do with a for loop. So if you wanted to have operations, so if you did for each number, I want you to add the number to, let's say, a variable, you can then get the total of that list, and you can do various operations, and that could be quite useful when you're maybe doing some algorithm where you're searching, or maybe doing some repeated process on the same data or similar data in kind of a contained list. So we're going to talk about the third type of flow control in Python, which is a while loop. So a while loop is just saying, while this condition is true, we're going to continue to loop. So if the condition is always true, this while will continue forever. And if it's not, then it will not execute at all. But just to show you this example here, so we've got a variable count1, which is equal to 1, and what this while loop is going to do is say, so while the variable count is smaller or equal to 5, I want you to print that, so show me it, and then I want you to add 1 to count, and it's going to repeat that process. And then once it gets to 5, of course, this condition is no longer true, and it should stop. So let's just run that. Okay, and there you go. That's happened pretty quickly, but depending on what you do and how big the data set is and the processes that you're doing, you might be able to watch the figures be outputted in real time, but obviously that's a small data set, so it's all just come out at once. So we're going to talk about something called typecasting, and this could be quite useful in a few scenarios where you want to work with a particular data type, and the data type you got from the previous function or previous thing you did in your code doesn't actually match up. You can convert that data into the type that you want. So let's say you had an integer and you wanted this integer to be displayed as a float, you could do that. There's different ways to do it, but a typecast is useful. Or if you created a function and it required a float and it wouldn't work with an integer or a string, you could then do that typecasting. So you can typecast, let's say, the string or the characters 10 into an integer 10, in Python or a float 10.0 in Python. And vice versa, you can turn that float or integer into a string if you needed to like print out a message of some data that you got. Or you don't have to do that, and it would automatically happen if you try to basically create a message. Python would handle it in the back end. But if I just show you how that works, here I'll just run the code. So that integer has been made to a float in line 3, so from 10 it's become 10.0, and then 3.14 pi it becomes 3. So when you turn a float into an integer, it will just truncate all the decimals. Truncate basically removes them, and then integer to string, so 4 to 2 stays as 4 to 2, but it's actually seen as a string. And to be fair, most of that there would be seen as a string in the end. But yeah, so that's typecasting. So try except is basically a way of handling errors or handling an unexpected or expected incorrect result. Just a word of warning, try excepts I think are bad practice, because some developers would use it to, let's say, if you know your code isn't good enough and you're trying to test it and then you don't want a bug to come up, you'd use a try except condition to basically hide the bug. So that type of thing is used, and it shouldn't be, so don't get into the habit of trying to hide bugs through a try except. But try except are useful in some scenarios where you want to handle any expected incorrect data. But yeah, so just to show you how that works. So I'm just going to go through this and just do a try. So if you just see down here, it tried to do the operation, so it tried to do 1 divided by 0. Of course you can't do that, and this will come up as an error usually in Python, but the way it's handled it is it said, okay, look, this error is expected, and then it's just given some message saying exception, something wrong. So where you could use this is if, let's say you were analysing some data and there was a null value for some reason, maybe it's just some raw data you haven't edited, or you're just trying to have a look through a fresh batch of data and there's an incorrect value that's come through. You might want to handle that to give you a notification, okay, this data might be wrong, or take a look at that, but then the rest of the program will run, so you could still do analysis and analyze data that is still available to work with properly. We're just going to talk about commenting and docstrings. So you can actually put comments in your code to help the readability. So if you had written some code and you thought, yeah, this is perfect, everyone's going to understand it, and then you pass it to someone and they probably will struggle to get it as well as you do. But to make that easier, you can use comments in there to just help the readability, so they can say, oh, you know, this part of the code does this, or, you know, this function does that. And then there's something called a docstring, which is probably more formal description of what, let's say, your functions or your classes do. And like in this example, you can have a calculate area and you can explain what actually happens. So, you know, the arguments, what actually gets returned. And then it says here raises a value error, but of course, what else is there? And then there's an example as well. So yeah, that will give let's say if someone's reading the code, they'd understand without having to constantly contact you, what's going on, what does this bit do, or what does that line do, and so it just makes things a bit easier. Okay, and the final part of this tutorial episode is just going to be how you can pass a user input with Python in the command line. There's other ways, but just in this way. So I'll just run this code. So as you can see, we've used in line 3, username is equal to input, enter your name. So that will just give you a message to enter your name in the command line. And if you type something, so let's say ilac, and then you press enter, it would say print, goes on to the next line of available code, and it says print hello, and then it stored that user input, and it says hello ilac, exclamation mark, and then now it says user age, enter your age, and let's just say I'm 40 years old, and if I press enter, it says you are 40 years old, So that's how you'd simply take user input in the command line. Now, you obviously can tell that that's not going to be very useful if you're building web applications or whatever else. It might be useful if you don't want a good UI, you just want kind of a command line interface type of thing. But in this case, yeah, quite useful for like a local app or something you were doing yourself. Or you could prompt, if you are deploying an application, you can prompt them to kind of put details in command line rather than on the web app, which can be better for security. But yeah, so it could be useful, could not be useful really. So it just depends on your requirement. Okay, so thanks for watching that video. I've really just ran through that really quickly because I'm away and I'm trying to manage we're going to do some sightseeing and I'll do a vlog. But I thought I would just quickly do the tutorial video because I've been saying I'll post videos like the investment one and not posted it. Whereas like now I'm just like, well, said I'm going to post it, I'm going to post it. Even if it's bad, just post it anyway. Anyway, enough of a rant. Hope you enjoyed the video. Watch out for the next tutorial video.